Disclaimer.
With 2023 behind us, I'm sure the entertainment industry will look back on this year as a strange time. We had both the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes this year, with the majority of artists who make film and TV possible demanding better pay, improved working conditions, and AI protections to mixed success. We've also seen a huge impact on box office returns, the biggest factors being from changes in audience behavior. Between the shortening windows from theatrical runs to streaming releases, the price gouging we've all decided to call inflation, a decline in brand loyalty, and lingering pandemic behaviors, audiences are more mindful of how they spend their money. But 2023 wasn't all doom and gloom because the audience for film remained strong. For example, the Barbenheimer phenomenon got audiences excited to watch two movies which were considered financial risks, both being dialogue-heavy films helmed by auteur directors where only one of these two flicks was based on a pre-existing profitable IP. By all accounts, it's a miracle that either film was greenlit, let alone became among the most successful movies released this year. Now, regardless of how these trends affect the entertainment industry long term, I think in a few years' time, many will point to 2023 as another year of big changes. So with 2023 behind us, I've compiled a list of some of my favorite films that came out this past year. Now before we begin, let's make things very clear. These are some of my favorite movies that were released in 2023. Now I'll be the first to admit that I've been slacking in watching new movies lately. I didn't get to watch every new film released in 2023, and there were plenty of movies that I did see that just aren't worth mentioning. So if a movie you really liked isn't on this list, it clearly means that I think you're stupid, and you're dumb, and your taste is stinky poo-poo caca, and you should defend your objectively correct opinions from this self-righteous schmuck in the comment section down below. If you want to help support this show, consider checking out our online store or grabbing us a Ko-fi by following the links in our description. If you want to help support us for free, then feed the algorithm by dropping a like or dislike, joining the social media horde, commenting down below, and subscribing for future videos from this channel. Your support is always appreciated. Now with all that out of the way, let's get to our top 5 movies of 2023 right after some honorable mentions. If you want to jump ahead to the good stuff, hit the timestamp on screen or down in the description to get to our top 5, but for the rest of you, sit back, grab a snack, and let's get into those honorable mentions. We're starting off our honorable mentions by giving a nod to Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Following the events of Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse follows Miles Morales' continuing journey to discover what it means to be Spider-Man, meeting variant Spider-Folk as he faces a multi-dimensional threat to reality itself. Much like its predecessor, Across the Spider-Verse is a dazzling feat of animation prowess. The opening sequence alone would have been enough to satisfy me for the year if it was a short film, and it was just the first 10 minutes of the movie. And much like its predecessor, Across the Spider-Verse continues to present an interesting dialogue on the superhero narrative in a way that its competitors in the genre would never dare risk. I think the biggest issue that holds this film back for me is that it can't stand on its own, since it's both a sequel and part 1 to a 2-part movie. I'll admit this is a nitpick I have with most sequels, but that cliffhanger ending was just so frustrating to see. But all that means is that I'll be revisiting Across the Spider-Verse once we see the release of part 2, which is now titled Beyond the Spider-Verse. But at the end of the day, I'm in no rush, because Across the Spider-Verse is proof that delaying a film is often for the best, and that studios should pay their animators more. We also have to give a nod to one of the most divisive films of the year, Kyle Edward Ball's Skinamarink. In Skinamarink, two children wake up to find their home warped into an uncanny nightmare by an unseen force. I think part of the divisive reputation that Skinamarink has comes from expectations. This movie is probably best described as a horror experience rather than a horror film, since we generally expect that films will focus on things like narrative or character. With Skinamarink, there really isn't much of either unless you really dig for it. This is a movie that focuses on suffocating you with mood and atmosphere, and leaves you with plenty of questions that have no clear answers. For maximum effect, Skinamarink is best watched alone in a dark room on your phone at 3 AM, but it's still not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Though it's extremely divisive, I found Skinamarink to be both memorable and effective, and I hope that in the future, unconventional projects like this get more of a spotlight. And let's finish this up with a quick lightning round of movies that I really enjoyed. I watched Honor Among Thieves, which is a fun fantasy heist flick with a light tone, solid action, and some good practical effects. I respect it a lot for being a new and approachable fantasy film that doesn't compromise on its premise. I also saw Nimona, which is a science fantasy adventure movie with solid emotional beats and cute characters who effectively deliver the film's themes of acceptance in the face of fear and hatred. And finally, although Puss in Boots: The Last Wish was technically released a few days before Christmas in 2022, I didn't get to see it until January, so I'm going to give it more of the mountain of praise that it's already deserved. I never thought that a sequel to an awful prequel spin-off of Shrek would be packed with gorgeous animation and so many delightful characters. So my final tip of the hat goes to The Last Wish, which probably could have made it into the meat of this list if it was released like 2 weeks later than it was. If any of these movies sound like they might be up your alley, I recommend giving them a chance, but for now, it's time for my top 5 favorite movies of 2023. 2023. These were the movies that truly stood out amongst the rest, and while I'll do my best to minimize spoilers for these films, if you want to go into these flicks completely blind, I suggest you proceed with caution. So squeaking in at my number 5 spot is the Barbie movie. Directed by Greta Gerwig, the Barbie movie tells the story of stereotypical Barbie, played by Margot Robbie, whose perfect dream world is intruded by the misgivings of the real world, like flat feet, bad breath, and an existential fear of death. Discovering these intrusions come from the child playing with Barbie, she and Beach Ken, played by Ryan Gosling, enter the real world to find Barbie's owner and fix these cracks in the otherwise perfect Barbie land. What makes the Barbie movie a success in my eyes is the effort that went into producing this film. It would have been easy for the bigwigs at Mattel to puke up some low-effort garbage, paint it pink, and slap the Barbie branding on it for a fat paycheck. Instead, Greta Gerwig and her spouse Noah Baumbach assembled a script which explores Barbie's role in popular culture, the expectations of gender roles on both men and women, and the existential questions brought up by the way we live our lives. To maximize your enjoyment, you have to set your expectations appropriately for this film. Now, my expectations were pretty low, so I was surprised by what this movie had to offer, but it seems like a lot of folks have inordinately high expectations for the Barbie movie, and as a result, wind up walking away disappointed. Thematically, the Barbie movie acts more as an introduction to the many themes that the film explores, rather than a grad school level dissertation. Furthermore, this is a movie that would rather tell us about these ideas than show us. Now, I found this understandable considering there's only so much one can say about the broad spectrum of ideas being explored in the Barbie movie while still remaining coherent. Not to mention, with media literacy at an all-time low, I get why the film just spells out what the writers are trying to say so the audience understands these ideas with minimal confusion. The tell not show approach may leave some with a bad taste in their mouths, but I still think it's fine for what the movie's trying to do. While these themes are given a solid exploration, especially considering this is the Barbie movie we're talking about, there's still some gripes to be had with this flick, the biggest issue for me being its tone. Although the Barbie movie is generally campy in tone, it tries its best to balance the moments of levity with its heavier themes, social commentary, and some genuine heartfelt moments. And while some of the many tonal transitions were done fine enough, there was more than one sequence in this movie that I felt was just a little too tonally jarring. For me, the most egregious example is the chase sequence in Mattel headquarters, whose semi-comedic but tense tone is interrupted halfway through by a quiet, somber scene where Barbie has tea with an elderly woman. Now, to minimize spoilers, all I'll say is that this woman does have a role to play later in the film, so it's not like this scene is superfluous, it's just the placement in the movie I find questionable. Rather than tea time preceding this chase sequence or acting as its conclusion, it serves as the middle point of Barbie's escape from Mattel headquarters, so it interrupts the tone and pacing of an otherwise effective chase. Now, this might be the worst example of Barbie's breakneck tonal shifts for me, but your mileage may vary. Otherwise, the performances were lots of fun, and the film's insistence on practical sets and props was greatly appreciated. I also love that despite the Barbie movie having some absurdist elements, the film still treats its premise completely seriously. In the past decade, it's become more and more commonplace for stories to give these meta nods and winks to the audience ridiculing its own premise, as if the writers themselves are embarrassed of what they're selling us. Having grown accustomed to this eye-rolling trend, it's refreshing to see a movie unapologetically embrace its plot's appropriately childlike logic. In spite of its flaws, the Barbie movie proved itself to be an overall enjoyable experience, going above and beyond the expectations of an IP-driven picture to deliver on a story that's sure to be enjoyed for years to come. At our number 4 spot, we have Miyazaki's The Boy and the Heron. Following the tragic death of his mother in a hospital fire, Mahito Maki, voiced by Soma Santoki, moves to a grand estate in the countryside with his father and aunt, who recently married. In the midst of this whirlwind of changes, a gray heron, voiced by Masaki Suda, invites Maki to a mysterious abandoned tower surrounded by many curious legends. The Boy and the Heron is a coming-of-age film that explores the relentless force of change. Maki not only has to overcome the various huge changes in his personal life, but also the various shifts in reality as he traverses these otherworldly realms of existence. In this regard, The Boy and the Heron reminds me a lot of Spirited Away. Although both stories are coming-of-age movies with similar plot devices of traveling between worlds, thematically they're distinct enough to stand on their own. Unlike in Spirited Away, which evokes Alice in Wonderland as it explores themes of tradition, consumerism, and the supernatural, the cast of The Boy and the Heron are faced with overcoming the force of transformation. And that through line of transformation being an unrelenting force of nature is the strongest part of this movie. In this film, change is a constant, but it's depicted as neither wholly good or bad. Transformation is seen in the heron's feathers, which are turned into arrows or flat out torn to shreds. It exists where things are created and destroyed, where creatures are born and die, and it does not ask for our permission to exist. It may be harnessed for good and for ill, but no matter the case, The Boy and the Heron asks its characters, and by extension us the audience, if we're able to persist despite the results of this all-encompassing force of nature. The Boy and the Heron is yet another powerful entry in Miyazaki's filmography and is easily worth your your time as one of the best movies I've seen this year. And if those themes were a little too heavy for you, then this is your chance to get off this ride, because it only gets more grim from here. Whee! At number 3, we have Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer explores the life of theoretical physicist and father of the nuclear bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer, played by Cillian Murphy, exploring his early scientific career, his involvement with the Manhattan Project during World War II, and both the social and literal fallout that haunt him after the war. You may be surprised to hear that despite being an accomplished director, I have some mixed feelings about Christopher Nolan's work, as regardless of the quality of the art in question, his films are pretty hit or miss for me. Combine this with my personal distaste of J. Robert Oppenheimer as a person, and I was very skeptical I'd walk away enjoying this film at all, but much to my surprise, I found Oppenheimer to be an excellent experience and easily one of the best films Nolan's ever done. Oppenheimer is a dialogue-heavy character study, a breed of film that is rarely given the fanfare of a major blockbuster in the current landscape. There's been the odd critique thrown around that Oppenheimer the film plays softball for Oppenheimer the man, particularly with how some perceive the movie downplays the destruction caused by Oppenheimer's most horrifying creation. Now, as a resident Oppenheimer hater, while I do believe the film could have better illustrated just how bad the atomic bomb was beyond the admittedly awe-inspiring montages of unfathomably huge explosions that we do receive, I'm not sure if I'd go so far as to say the film is apologetic of its main subject. Wordlessly and repeatedly, the film illustrates how the creation of the atomic bomb is the scientific equivalent of Adam and Eve biting the forbidden fruit of knowledge, the opening of Pandora's box into a terrifying age where mutually assured destruction is a horrifying likelihood. This, combined with the characters frequently vocalizing their concerns that this discovery may destroy reality itself in the testing phase, I think the movie illustrates the existential terror of these scientific achievements, all while showing how desperate the characters are to even consider this as a solution to ending the war. Do I believe that Nolan's Oppenheimer could have been more critical? Absolutely, but I also don't think that Nolan is painting the subject as a victim of circumstance either. This movie is a complex portrait of a complex individual, which is a cliched statement if ever there was one, but it remains true even for the father of the most terrifying class of weapons devised in the past century. At the end of the day, I feel the best biopics and historical films are more than anything an exploration of an aspect of life through a particular time, place, or person. And in the case of Oppenheimer, Nolan's latest picture is about the lengths that people will go to for knowledge and achievement even in their darkest hour, and I think that makes this a worthy watch. At our number 2 spot, we have Takashi Yamazaki's Godzilla -1. In Godzilla -1, Ryunosuke Kamikiki plays Koichi, a kamikaze pilot who flees from his duties towards the end of World War II. Landing on Odo Island, Koichi becomes one of the few survivors of an attack from the terrifying kaiju Godzilla, and years later, as Koichi begins to rebuild his life, Godzilla returns. Godzilla has an impressive and complicated legacy in film, which leaves newcomers to the franchise struggling with choice paralysis with where to begin their journey. Thankfully, the latest entry in the long history of the King of the Monsters is not only among the best in the franchise, it's probably one of the best entry points for newcomers to the series. Godzilla -1 exemplifies what makes the best Godzilla films work. Yeah, there's wide-scale destruction at the hands of a big goofy lizard who do a big scream and spit hot fire lasers, but when Godzilla is written as a symbol in service of the movie's bigger themes, there is depth to be had, and it is a glorious watch. In the case of -1, Godzilla stands not only as a symbol of Japan's collective national trauma and the shadow of nuclear destruction, but also as a monument of the guilt and dishonor our protagonist Koichi feels for having failed to perform his duties as a kamikaze. In this respect, Godzilla -1 is effectively a post-war historical drama that just so happens to star Godzilla. There's much to praise in this movie. The performances are all fantastic, the conflict is palpable, there's a sequence evocative of Spielberg's Jaws that I absolutely adored, and overall, Godzilla -1 is just a gripping story about cutting through the thick fog of hopelessness in the quest for a hopeful future. If you've never seen a Godzilla movie, this is easily among the best entries in the franchise to start with. And finally, the number 1 best movie I saw in 2023 was Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. In this epic Western crime drama, members of the Osage Nation of Indigenous Americans are struck with fortune as they discover oil on their lands. Unfortunately, with this good luck comes a swarm of white folk looking to profit off the Osage, and among the greedy hopefuls is Ernest Burkhart and his uncle, William King Hale, played by Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro respectively. Together, King Hale uses Ernest as a pawn in his scheme to claim the Osage fortune for himself, starting with the marriage of Ernest and Molly Kyle, played by Lily Gladstone. In adapting David Grann's non-fiction book of the same name, Scorsese adjusts the presentation of this series of real-world horrors, taking Grant's journalistic presentation of these crimes as a mystery plaguing the Osage and instead letting the audience in on the conspiracy from the get-go. The result is a truly horrifying depiction of the banality of evil within the American frontier. The genocide of the Osage people is an open secret that King Hale enforces behind a paper-thin facade of kindness, and the conspiracy encourages everyone from lawmen and doctors to lowly criminals to commit atrocities in the name of lining their pockets. The all-encompassing evils permitted by this systemic injustice only hits hard two-parter thanks to the phenomenal performances of the cast at large. Though both DiCaprio and De Niro give great performances as expected, it's Lily Gladstone's performance that stands as the emotional heart of the story. Molly Kyle does have distance from the spotlight of this story, as the film focuses on the perspectives of Hale, Ernest, and their conspiracy at large to make our blood boil at the ease with which such injustices are dealt. But without the emotional insight, we do get into Molly's personal struggles with both diabetes and the ever-present anguish she feels with the passing of each loved one, often at the hands of the devils in her own house. This movie would not be as effective as it is. I also appreciate the authenticity with which the Osage Nation is depicted. Although I'm no cultural expert, it's my understanding that the Osage people are presented as authentically as possible in this movie. While I understand the disappointment that some have expressed that this film doesn't keep the Osage perspective as the focus of the story, seeing the positive reactions to this movie's authenticity is still great to see. The perspective shift towards the perpetrators of this violence makes sense, as the movie seems more concerned with showcasing the pervasiveness of systemic injustice and how it encourages genocide, but unfortunately that means the Osage people take a backseat in the narrative. Although the end result is the feeling that the Osage characters are underwritten at times, I still hope that this representation encourages more large-scale films from an indigenous perspective in the future. And if Killers of the Flower Moon hadn't won me over already, the final sequence, which forces the audience to examine their relationship with true crime content and the injustices others face, truly makes this movie exceptional. From the fantastic performances and a brutal, gripping story, for all of this and more, Killers of the Flower Moon is yet another jewel from one of the best filmmakers to ever live, and easily one of the best movies I saw in 2023. So, do you agree with our list? Let us know what your favorite movies from 2023 are in the comment section down below. Don't forget to drop a like or dislike, and subscribe to Greggo Movie Rants for future videos from this channel. If you want to help support the show, be sure to check out our online store and our Ko-fi link down in the description. And be sure to check out our sister channel, The Arcane Opal, for talks on mixology, tabletop RPGs, and various other videos we have coming down the pipeline. Until next time, this has been Greggo Movie Rants, and I'll be here.
Okay, thanks, bye!